Hi, welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be doing my August reading wrap up. I think I read uh 8 books this month. I have a few in here too that are very, very popular, and I'm gonna have some hot takes, but let's get into it. The first book I read this month was Cricket Kingdom. This is the second and final book in the Six of Crows duology. If you've been watching my channel, you have probably seen that I read Six of Crows, I think in April or May, and I was a little late to this duology. I heard so many good things about it, so I hopped on it. Six of Crows, I actually really enjoyed. I think I gave it 4 stars, which is pretty high for popular books that I've seen. Because usually when I read popular books, I'm kind of disappointed or let down. But I actually really enjoyed Six of Crows, so I was excited to pick up Cricket Kingdom. Cricket Kingdom, and I think this is probably the general consensus on this second book. It didn't do what the first book did in the way that in the first book there's a lot of character building, a lot of character background, a lot of really clever scheming, lots of cliffhangers. I felt like in this one we already knew the characters, so understandably we're not going to learn that much about them. We did a little bit, but just not the same character learning that we did in the first one. And then there was a lot of plot dead ends in this book because, without giving too much away, it's kind of a heisty, schemy type thriller YA. And Lee Bardugo writes that really well and keeps you kind of on the edge of your seat. But with this one, the main character, he just didn't feel like he was pulling off as much stuff as seamlessly as he did in the first book, which maybe that was the point. There was supposed to be some development to show the fallibility in the main character, but I just didn't like that. There was a lot of things that they did that just didn't work out, and then they would just kind of pivot to something else, and then that plot was kind of left there. And I understand how it kind of wrapped up the end. I just didn't like it. I mean, I'm just gonna say it. I didn't really like it as much, okay? Another thing, at the end of the book, a major thing happens to one of these main characters. I didn't see why it was necessary. I didn't like it. I didn't think that it added anything to the plot or the story, but to kind of check a box of things to do in these kinds of books. And I just felt that the end kind of wrapped up a little too tidy. So, I'm talking very passively because I don't want to spoil this if you are like me and haven't gotten around to the series yet. Overall, it was fine. It was entertaining, but I think I'm going to give it 3 stars. The next book I read this month was The Berry Pickers. So, this book I was really highly anticipating because it just felt like it was involving all of the things I really like about books. And one of the things that I really gravitate towards is family stories, and especially families that are either disadvantaged or families that have to kind of go through a lot more than the regular everyday person. And I like reading those stories. When I read the premise of this book, I was really all in. It is a book about this Native American family. I think it takes place in like the 50s, the 60s. Well, it takes place 60s, 70s, and then I think even further. But it starts with this Native American family who would go to these farmlands every summer to pick berries and make extra money. And one summer, the youngest daughter, I think she's the youngest, disappears, and she's 4 years old. So she disappears. The family looks for her. They get law enforcement involved, but very much of that time, there's a lot of prejudice, and law enforcement doesn't put a lot of time or effort into actually finding this little girl. So it follows the family as they kind of process it and move on with their lives. And it also, on the flip side, also follows this girl in the life that she is after she's abducted. So you're kind of following dual timelines or dual POVs in this. The big reveal at the end is, I think it's pretty obvious, like what happens to this girl, what happens to this family. And I felt like we knew what was going to happen the whole time. Like we knew it was all leading up to that point. So it was kind of anticlimactic for me in that way. And there wasn't as much emotional connection with these characters that I anticipated. I thought I was going to be really emotionally invested, and I just wasn't. I don't know if it was the writing style or what it was, but resonate with me or impact me in the way that I had wanted it to. So it kind of was just an okay read. There was points where I was kind of getting bored, if I'm honest. So it was all right. I ended up giving it 3 stars. The next book I read was The Beauty in Breaking, a memoir. If you know me, I like a memoir, and this was the one I picked up this month. This follows a doctor who, in the beginning of the book, her life is kind of falling apart. You know, her and her partner are separating. She's kind of in between jobs, and she is, I guess, to this title, her life is kind of breaking, falling apart. And she gets this new job at a VA hospital, which is notoriously underfunded. And she meets all of these different people of different walks of life, and she learns different things from them, from their injury, and kind of uses that as something to reflect about in her personal life. And each chapter is like a different anecdote or a different patient. Overall, I really liked it. I thought it was a really interesting take. I enjoyed reading it, and a lot of the stories in here you could really like feel. And I think because it's nonfiction, I tend to be more emotionally invested because I know these people are real, or based on real people at least. But I will say the one thing that I didn't like about it was the author always seemed to know what to say, or always seemed to have the perfect way to handle the situation. And I just don't think that that's realistic. And I wish she would have shared experiences where maybe she didn't have the best take in the beginning, and then she kind of learned from it, because every instance she knew what to say, she knew how to handle them, and it just felt preachy, like she could do no wrong. I wish she would have showed a little bit more vulnerability in her profession, where she showed it in her personal life, but not so much in her profession. And I kind of wanted her to show it a little bit more in her profession and not be so perfect. But overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was good, and this was one that I had kind of had my eye on for quite some time, so I'm glad that I finally got to it. So I gave this one 4 stars. I'm kind of scared to talk about this one because it is so well loved. Actually, the next two are books that are really well loved that just didn't work for me. The first one is Betty. This book is super popular. I think it has like a 4.5, 4.4 rating on Goodreads. A lot of people really love it. And I can understand. I get why people love it. It just didn't do what I wanted it to do, or it just didn't work for me. This is a book about a little girl named Betty, and it follows her life and her family. It's kind of a coming of age story. And her father is Native American and her mother is white. And all of her siblings are white passing except for her. She looks very Native American. And she grows up in the 50s and 60s and 70s, I think. So she is experiencing a lot of racism, a lot of obstacles that her siblings are not facing. And so that kind of ties her to her father and creates a really special bond. And there's a ton of characters. She has a lot of siblings. The main character is based on this author's mother. So I think this author took a lot of anecdotes or stories and used them to base a lot of the things that happened to Betty on. I don't know how much or how little. So things I know why people like it. I can understand people liking this because there's a lot of big emotional things that happen. So there's a lot of things that really connect you to this character, and she goes through a lot of obstacles, a lot of hurdles. And so I can understand when you go through these with this character, you feel a lot of empathy for her and you want her to come out on top at the end, and you have a lot of hope for her. And I will say it does have a hopeful tone, so I can see people liking that. And this author really writes these characters really well. These characters really fleshed out. You really see their connection with each other. You kind of watch them grow and see their lives happen. So I understand the love for that. I enjoyed that as well. My issue with it, I think, was one, it's really long. And some people might say that is a positive. For me, I felt like there was some stuff in here that wasn't necessary. I think it's nearly 500 pages. And there's a lot of there's a lot of traumatic things that happen in this book. So definitely check your trigger warnings. This has basically every trigger warning you can think of, or a lot. And it's not just one instance. You will come across trauma after trauma after trauma. And some of it I totally understood, and I knew why it was included, to help the movement of this family, and for you to show the dysfunction and show the grief and show the despair that she goes through and the supporting characters go through. But some of it I felt like was just dogpiling, and I felt like we were just having another traumatic moment just to have another traumatic moment. And it's hard to read. I don't shy away from books that are hard to read, but I just felt like sometimes it was hard to read for no reason. Like some of the instances, I was like, why did we have to add that? We already had a traumatic experience similar to that. This is kind of what I imagine A Little Life would be similar to. Not that this is as traumatic as A Little Life, because I think A Little Life is way more involved, but I would say that this is kind of in the mild version of that. There was a lot of irrational moments that happened with this family, or a lot of like different circumstances that happened where you were just like, whoa, that's insane. Like, I can't believe, her mother said that to her. She's so young. Like, I can't believe that that happened. And then the rest of the family knows, or the father knows, and it's never discussed. It's never brought up again. And she's just left to deal with it. And I understand in some families that's how it is. But I felt like really traumatic or really damaging things would be said. And then the next chapter, those two characters would be fine. And we wouldn't really see anybody kind of touch on that or talk about that or expand on that, especially when we were having these traumatic experiences. I kind of wanted the characters to expand on it a little bit more than it was. And I guess it's kind of left to you to kind of take what you get from it and understand where a lot of these characters are coming from. But I just wish it was more in this book. So it's a really convoluted review, I guess, unless you've read this book. But overall, it just wasn't what I anticipated. And I was thinking this was going to be like a 5-star read for me, at least a 4-star, because it had all of the elements that I really like. But it kind of fell flat, and I was really sad about it. So I ended up giving this one 3 stars. The next book that I also am, I'm questioning. I don't know if it's questioning my taste, everybody else's taste, or a little bit of both, but the next book was Piranesi. This was on my list of books for 2024. I was like, I have to get to it. Everybody loves this book. They're obsessed with this book. I'm going to be obsessed with this book. It can do no wrong. Nobody ever has a bad review. Hello. Welcome to my channel. This book, maybe I don't get it. I get like why. Okay, do you ever have those moments where you have to critique and then you can literally imagine yourself as like a third party watching your critique and being like, no, they just didn't get that because of this, or they just didn't get that because of this? I have done that exercise in my head already, and I still feel like the things that I didn't understand about this book are valid. So hear me out. First, if you haven't read this book, the general premise of this book is there is a character called Piranesi, a man. He lives in this empty, endless, infinite, kind of like museum, mausoleum type building. It's just infinite in every direction. And water comes in, the tide comes in every once in a while, and he fishes and he survives on his own with the little supplies that he has. And he journals and takes care of the statues in there. And once a week, he goes to meet the only other person that he knows, which is like, they call him the other man. And he has a meeting with him, and the other man often asks him, hey, can you go check out this and make notes or tell me what you see or whatever, come back. So this is really his only connection to another human being. Other than that, he just lives in this mausoleum of endless statues, and he doesn't remember how he got there or why he's there. This is just his life. This is it. And he kind of only has his journals to kind of look back on. First off, this was totally my bad. Looking at this cover, I thought it was a Greek retelling. I thought it was a Greek retelling. It's not. It's not a Greek retelling. And this is like one of the statues. As I'm saying that, I think this is probably like a metaphor for who he is and about this character. And I don't know a lot about this character in history, so I'm probably missing some kind of metaphor there. It didn't do anything for me. I'll just say that. It didn't really do anything for me. I didn't feel connected to this character. I felt like the ending was very lackluster and you still didn't get a lot of answers. And just on the writing style, as you read, and especially when you begin the book, there's a lot of detail about these vestibules and these structures and these statues. And there's so much description that you feel like you need to remember because there must be some reason why you're getting all of this detail. No, there's no reason. There's no reason you need to know all that because it doesn't come back. It's just a weird writing style, I feel like, when there's not a purpose or a meaning to it. I don't know. I don't really know what to say. I guess I'm kind of at a loss to why people enjoy this book so much and love it with as much passion as they do. And I guess that's what makes reading so great is that we all have such a different take from the same exact book. I'm just curious why it's so overwhelmingly on the positive side. But of course, just like a lot of times, I am in the minority, and that's okay. That's why I like reading books. So, and I also probably went into this really hyped and was only leading myself up for disappointment. So I ended up giving Piranesi 2 stars. This is one of my few 2 stars. I rarely get to 2 stars on books, but this one just didn't do it for me. I will say, if you are interested in this book, give it a go. It's pretty short, it's pretty quick and easy to read. You may love it, which odds are, compared to all the reviews, you will love it, and it's just a me thing. But I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I figured out what it was all about, but I'm sad that it didn't hit me like it did everybody else. Tower of Dawn continued my Throne of Glass journey, as I like to call it here. This book was very big and is the second to last book. This book is taking place in the same timeline as the book before, Empire Storms. It's just following a different set of characters. I'm going to put in spoilers because I feel like I really can't talk about this book without I can't talk about my review without going into spoilers. So go ahead and skip forward. I'll put some kind of note or something to tell you when to come back if you don't want to hear spoilers. Okay, so this book follows Kale and Nezrin. And Kale is, or Kale, as I have learned from listening to the audiobook, he is obviously paralyzed from the last book that he was in, and he was paralyzed by a dark Valg king or Valg demon. So he is paralyzed. He's going to this place where they have magical healers, and these magical healers live in the Tower of Dawn. So him and Nezrin, they're kind of sweet on each other from the last book and take this journey together. As soon as this book starts, they do not like each other apparently, or they have no interest romantically in each other all of a sudden. And as a reader, you're just left holding the bag. Like, you have no understanding of what happened from the last book that they were in to this book, because all of a sudden they're just cold and they just want to be friends and not like friends, you know what I mean? So it's kind of weird. Kale meets this healer. She's this all magical healer, and she happens to be the healer that Aelin, these names, that Aelin helped kind of get to where she is, that we read in the prequel novel Assassin's Blade. Kale's like, wow, this Irene healer chick, she is cute and attractive and beautiful, just like every Throne of Glass character is, because everybody is really attractive, everybody is beautiful. So they start to kind of like work together a lot, because it takes a lot of time to fix his legs because he has some darkness in him. The issue I had was, I cannot read a book. Well, I did read a book. I do not like reading a book when half the book is him just trying to like wiggle some toes. Like, we needed some quicker development and some editing, because it took us too long to get to any kind of action or any kind of plot other than them just kind of having sessions. And then Nezrin, on her side, she's off with this king, or not this king, he's a prince, maybe king one day. and they're off doing their little thing and kind of falling in love because they're also both hot and attractive and pair off very conveniently. That's another thing that happens in these books. The characters always pair off romantically very conveniently, and everybody is super hot. And it's interesting because when I read this, a lot of the characters' descriptions, they all sound like to me that they look alike or that they're very similar looking. So I can just imagine this is like a Barbie house of like the same good looking characters, and they all look the same, and then they all just kind of like magically pair off with each other. So that's probably my take. I know there's a lot of people that don't feel that way. That's just how I feel. But anyways, I just felt like it was a little too slow. There's a lot of weird things that happen where I was like, okay, that's convenient, like I've talked about. The last 150 pages, really fun. Really enjoyed that part. Wish there was more of that in this book. And I liked how it kind of all came together at the end. And I think it's really interesting how Chaol's use of his leg is going to be connected to Irene's power levels, basically. I don't know how that's going to work in the final book or why that has been made a plot point. So I'm really interested to see where that goes. And it did kind of set you up at the end to be excited for this, like, a final battle, good versus evil thing that the last book is going to hopefully wrap up nicely. So it wasn't my favorite from this series so far. I think it could use some major editing. That's a lot of times my critiques on her books, but overall it was fine. I think I initially gave it 4 stars, and then the more I thought about it, I was like, no, it's 3 stars. So, and I don't do half stars. I'm gonna give it 3 stars. I almost thought about rolling in to just continue reading and go to the last book, but then the last book's like almost 1,000 pages, and I was like, I need some time. I need some time. So, anyways, 3 stars for this one. And then I had a couple books that I read on my Kindle because I borrowed them from the library. The first one is Cleopatra and Frankenstein. This is my first Coco Mellors book, and I think I think she only has 2 books out now. I think her second book, Blue Sisters, just came out not too long ago, which I actually have. But Cleopatra and Frankenstein, it follows this like early young 20s girl named Cleo and this like mid 30s man named Frank. And so it's just kind of a running inside joke of Cleopatra and Frankenstein. And they get together in the beginning of the book, and it kind of follows their life and the supporting characters of people in their life, like their friends and family and such. The things I liked was that the author wrote the characters really gritty and really vulnerable. They were very, very flawed. The only thing that was hard for me is I felt like they were so flawed and written in a way where I didn't find a lot of redeeming qualities in them, and I didn't really root for them. I was just kind of like whatever as I read them. I was like, it didn't really matter to me. I think also too what kind of threw me off was the author introduced new point of views like 50-60% of the way in the book, and it kind of threw me off because we were following us 2 or 3, and then all of a sudden there's a new character's point of view, and I don't quite know if those points of views were necessary because then she didn't give much weight to some of those characters, or their story didn't really amount to much. So it was kind of just like we got really invested in the character and then it was all for naught in a way. And it was a very long book and it doesn't have a lot of plot. So you're just vibing with characters and kind of waiting to see what happens to them. We'll say it's a pretty easy, fun read because they're getting into their own interpersonal dramas and such. I don't know, I wanted to feel for the characters a little more or care about them a little more than I did. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I'm hoping that the second book that I bought, Blue Sisters, is similar in the way that she writes the characters really well, but that they're characters that I can find more qualities in than I like. I tend to want to like my characters, and if they're super unlikable or annoying the whole way through, then it kind of loses me a little bit, but I ended up giving it 3 stars. Then I read The Princess Diarist by Carrie Fisher. This is her memoir, and it basically is a memoir from when she was shooting Star Wars to present time, and it's called Princess Diarist because she includes diary entries that she wrote while she was filming Star Wars. She was 19 when she first filmed Star Wars and hadn't really been in any major film or television at that point, she kind of, it almost seemed like she kind of fell into it, and she thought she was just going to be in a weird little niche sci-fi film with a small audience, which, as we all know, it blew everybody's expectations out of the water and really became one of the most popular franchises in history. She really seemed like it focused on her romance with Harrison Ford. So I think it's always been alluded to the fact that Carrie Fisher and Harrison Ford had some kind of romance during the filming, but neither one of them have ever confirmed it. And in this book, she confirms it. And she basically says, I don't really care to tell anybody, but I'd rather it come out of my mouth than anybody else's. And if I pass away one day, then I want to be the one to tell you what happened and it not be some made up story that wasn't true. Harrison Ford was married at the time, and he also was, I think, like 15 years older than her. So there was a big age and power gap there. So it kind of made you feel a little like weird about it. And she confesses it was very unrequited. She was very young, very kind of taken up in his aura, and he very much came to that relationship as like a one time, not a one time, but like a little fling that wasn't going to last. So it was really interesting to read those vulnerable diary entries about it. I will say she doesn't go into a ton of detail in the diary entries or in her description of what went on. She often says she doesn't remember. It wasn't important enough for her to remember. So part of me wonders if she actually doesn't remember or she just doesn't want to include it to kind of protect Harrison Ford. So you're not going to get a ton of details. You're going to kind of hear a little bit of that lore. And I wish she would have talked more about her time on set. She mostly talked about that romance when shooting Star Wars. And then she kind of followed her rise to fame and then her drop from fame when she got older and, as she puts it, like less desirable. And it was interesting. I wish that she would have had more grace with herself in the time that she was writing this memoir. She oftentimes in the memoir looks back at herself and kind of, hindsight is always like this. She'll tell herself, like, oh, I wish I would have known I was like the hot young thing and I was very charming. But at the time, I didn't know that or I didn't think that. So it's kind of a shame or waste. And so she understands that and she reflects on that. But then I was like, well, why don't you use that reflection on yourself now? Because she called herself fat a couple times in the book and undesirable, and kind of what she describes herself as kind of like, or alludes to herself that she's kind of washed out. And so I wish she just would have had more grace for her present self as she did, knowing that she should have done it when she was younger. Overall, it was a good read. I felt like it didn't go into too much depth in anything. It was a very general, quick memoir. I think it's only like 270 pages. And I feel like she's had a very vibrant, crazy life. And she could have spoke and talked about so many more things that weren't really talked upon or touched upon. So I ended up giving it 3 stars. I guess I just wanted more. And I wanted her to kind of give us a little bit more dirt or a little bit more details since she, like I said, she's had such a unique life. But that's just me. But overall, it was a good read. If you like Star Wars or you like Carrie Fisher, I would definitely give it a go because I think you'll probably really like it. So these plus a couple Kindle reads or what I got to in August. I got to a lot of books that I have been wanting to get to this year and that have been on my TBR. So I'm really excited about my progress this month. I am super jazzed about September. I feel like I have a lot of books in mind that are kind of going to fall under the end of summer, early fall vibes, or at least they will for me. And I'm very excited to start curating that TBR and getting into it. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in my next one.